in a fight, MMA or otherwise, would you substitute anger or rage for aggression?
Would I substitute anger or rage for aggression? This isn't a fight, MMA or otherwise. That's important, actually.
Yeah, so wait, so just to clarify, this means like instead of aggression, is it okay to use anger or rage?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think pretty obviously, and people would expect the answer to be from me, the initial answer here is no, and I would not substitute anger or rage for aggressiveness. I think, obviously, when you let rage take over, you're not thinking anymore.
Yeah.
And the mind is allegedly the most important weapon, and I actually believe that to be true. So if you let your rage and anger take over, you're not using your mind, and that's not good. And you actually get to see this in MMA on a fairly regular basis because you'll get somebody that is really good at talking smack.
Yeah.
And they'll get into the other person's head. What does it mean to get in the other person's head? What does it do to them? Does it make them sad? No. Does it make them not hate the opponent? No. What does it do to them? It makes them angry.
Yeah.
It makes them frustrated. And that anger leads to frustration, which leads to defeat. So, and again, I think it's important to recognize that this doesn't just occur in MMA. It occurs in everyday life. Mm-hmm. And a good example is when you get in a conversation with somebody, you get in a debate with somebody, you get in an argument with somebody. Mm-hmm. The minute you get frustrated or angry or enraged, you just lost the argument.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you might feel like you won.
Right.
But you will not win the argument. You lost the argument.
Yep.
The minute that happens.
Yeah. In any, especially if it's in a debate, man, because it's an understood. You're debating. You're kind of against each other, and then you just went off the rails, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not good to lose your temper in a debate, in a conversation, or in an MMA match.
It's like if you were playing chess. We were playing chess. And I was talking smack to you. You got frustrated, and then you flipped over the chessboard.
Yeah, you win. Actually,
with a display of monumental power or whatever that was.
Yeah,
for.
rage. Actually,
rage. Yes. Yeah. You lost. In a way.
Yeah. You absolutely lose. So, I talk about this all the time. Is that the rule is you'd never let your emotion get in control. So you don't let anger or rage overwhelm your little brain. Now, here's the other side of that coin. Here's the dichotomy. And I don't think you can even argue against this. Because that's a pretty sound argument, right? I mean, what we just said. I mean, we've seen it. We know for a fact. But rules are made to be broken. There are times when emotion can increase performance.
Yeah.
Right? There absolutely are. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, the Soviet Union was still just hardcore communist. And when I would watch like the Olympics, they would be like machines, the Soviets, with no emotions. And I thought, man, those guys are badass. I wanted to be like that. Yeah. And it often brought them victories. But I heard a quote when I was a kid, and I actually looked for it because I wanted to bring it up, but I couldn't find it. But it was something along the lines of this, and that was that the Soviet athletes perform better in practice, but the Americans perform better in the stadium. So the Americans, and that's not a universal statement, and there's plenty of examples of the Russians beating Americans and whatever, but there's also examples of where the Americans, with their emotion and their fire, were able to beat these Russians. And I mean, the greatest example would be the Miracle on Ice in Lake Placid, New York in 1980, which is, that was a bunch of college kids that were fired up to beat the hardened Russian professional hockey team.
Yeah.
And it's because, they kind of trained their emotions out of it. And there's a great time to have your emotions trained out of it. There's a great time where you're like, you know what? I'm not going to let my emotions play into this. Mm-hmm. I heard something about Tiger Woods and his golf game, and he's not thinking about, the broad statement is when he's hitting a shot in golf, he's not thinking about the last shot, and he's not thinking about the next shot. He's just thinking about that shot right there. Mm-hmm. So there's no emotional of whether he's ahead or behind or nothing else. He just is there on that one shot. So I think that, I think that people, Americans is the example I used, but I think that people in general can use your emotion to your advantage sometimes, but it does take control and it takes direction. And also, I think it's important to remember that it doesn't take long for that extra fire of anger to go from making you stronger and faster to making you slower and weaker, both mentally and physically. So you can get that burst. Mm-hmm. And, you see this in fighting all the time where people punch themselves out. They go level 7 rage and they start swinging for the fences.
Or even excitement, even.
Yeah, or excitement. They think they got the guy in the hurt locker. They come, they bring the thunder they get emotional.
Yep.
And I think on the mat, when you get a guy that loses his temper, when somebody loses their temper with me on the mat, it's just a matter of time. I just go, okay, cool. He's got 3 minutes left because he's going to be done. So, you've got to stay calm. Now, a couple situations that I've seen or been a participant in, and I'm pretty sure, I was trying to remember this for sure, but I was cornering Jeremy Stevens. And if you don't know who Jeremy Stevens is, Little Heathen MMA, awesome guy, stud fighter. And we were training him at the time, and he was fighting, I'm pretty sure it was against Marcus Davis, who's a well-respected boxer, really good MMA fighter as well, but definitely known for his boxing. Well, Jeremy's known for his striking as well. He's a very powerful striker, and he's got unbelievable one-punch knockout power, Jeremy does. So I was cornering Jeremy, and it was a really, really close fight. It was I didn't know if he was winning or losing. Mm-hmm. I think it was leaning towards Marcus, actually. And there's 3 rounds in MMA in this fight, and in between the second and the third round, I got in the ring, got in the cage with Jeremy, and I did the full on, in his face, and I gave him the, hey, listen, this is what's going on. This guy across the ring from you is taking money off your kids' table. He's taking food off your kids' table. He's going to take the roof off their heads. Mm-hmm. He's taking everything that you've worked for. He's going to take it from you right now. You got to get pissed. You got to go in there. You got to destroy him. And I gave him a fired up speech like that, and you could see it switch in his eyes. Mm. He realized, he went into a rage of, I need to kill this guy. Yeah. And he came out that round and knocked him out.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that's one. I'll tell you another one I saw. It was the same. So it was Carlos Condit versus Rory MacDonald. And this was the first time they fought. I'm pretty sure it was in Canada. I was there. I forget who I was cornering, but I was there, and I was done with cornering whoever I was cornering, and I want to say it was Peter Sabota I was cornering. I think it was up in Canada. But so Carlos Condit versus Rory MacDonald, and Carlos, who's the veteran, is going up against the kid. Rory MacDonald was he was an unknown, but he was definitely the younger. I think he was 20 years old. Just a kid. No offense, Rory, but he was young. You know what I mean? Badass, but young. And Carlos was the vet. You know what I mean? He was a veteran, grown man with a wife and kids. And man, Rory was getting the better of him. It was in front of Rory's hometown. Well, I don't know if it was his hometown, but it was in Canada. Mm. And so the crowd was absolutely supporting Rory. At least I'm pretty sure I remember this right. I'm sorry if I don't. But it seemed like the crowd was on the side of Rory MacDonald. So in between, so I'm just watching the fight, but I had snaked some really good seats, so I had a really good view. By the way, when I go to UFC, thanks Dana White and the rest of the crew, like I sneak into some awesome seats after I get done cornering people, so thank you. So I was sitting, in the second row or some phenomenal seat that I'd snuck into. And because they throw you in the cheap seats when you're cornering people.
Yeah.
You come out to watch the fights and yeah, you're up in the nosebleeds, which isn't cool. So I just get aggressive and tactically move to better positions,
Right.
which is usually the second row right behind the press box.
Sure.
So I'm sitting down there and I'm watching the fight, and Greg Jackson is cornering Carlos Condit. Now, if you don't know anything about Greg Jackson, he's a pretty zen-like guy, and I've actually going way back in the day, when Dean and I were competing all the time in the kind of the SoCal scene of grappling, we'd do every competition there was. We'd be competing all the time, grappling. I don't even remember. There were so many of them that we'd do, and Greg Jackson would bring guys out to fight, to compete. And so, like, we wrestled against these guys, or we did submission grappling against these guys, so I kind of knew him from that. And then, surprisingly, one time when the UFC was in San Diego, I was at work at the SEAL teams, and someone called and said, hey, there's a guy from the UFC here. Do you want to give him a tour of, he wants a tour. The UFC set up a tour of the SEAL teams. They want to show him around.
Like the facility.
The facilities, the whatever, show him some guns, just the gear, whatever. So I show up and it's Greg Jackson. And, we kind of had a little bit of a recognition. But anyways, Greg Jackson, and, you kind of hear this stuff about Greg Jackson all the time, that he's this really nice guy and that he's super mellow and that he's really humble. Well, it's all freaking true. He's a super nice guy. He's super humble. He's just a fantastic guy. And I gave him a tour, and so we kind of got to know each other. And then, going fast forward, now in the UFC, I've cornered him several times. I don't know how many times I've cornered against him.
Against him.
Like my fighters are fighting his fighters.
Yeah.
And like I said, he's a really mellow and a zen-like guy. If you watch him in the corners of his fights, he's always like that, just very steady. And hey, this is what you need to do. You need to watch out for this or whatever. So I'm watching this fight. And like I said, Carlos Condit versus Rory MacDonald. Carlos is not winning, right? He's not winning. And in between the second and the third round, Greg Jackson goes full berserker mode on Condit. I mean, he is yelling at him. He is in his face. He's pointing at him. He's waving his finger. He's just going nuts on him. And I was like, damn, Greg Jackson is bringing the heat. And sure enough, he amped up Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit came out and finished Rory in the third, which of a fight he was definitely going to lose. So what you see there is emotion helping to win in that situation.
Yeah.
And actually, when the fight was over, I saw Greg, and I just kind of said something to him, like, hey, you went full berserker mode on Carlos. And he said, yeah, he's like, I had to do it. And it's funny, you could see it. It almost seemed like he'd never done it before. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to have Greg on at some point. He can tell the story. But he said something along the lines of, I had to do it. And it worked. He had a big smile, and that was working it. And it definitely, indeed, it did work.
Yeah, and those, do you think, I mean, this is total guess, but do you think that's because those just happen to be the exceptions? Or is it, because really the formula kind of seems like, here's the emotion, and then here's all the logic and the skill and the planning, implementation of game plans and all the stuff that you're going to use in your mind. And here's the emotion. It's like a little spark plug or something. And then, sure, the emotion can go up, but the skill got to go up proportionately. And once you start to do this, when the emotion takes over, that's when when you're gonna fail or people are gonna take advantage.
But I think there's a sweet spot in there where, for moments in time, emotion and even borderlining on rage, which I think rage is a little bit strong, because I think rage, you lose your clarity, but anger,
Yeah.
Which is, you can still have some clarity of what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you can actually, that can be utilized appropriately at the right times. And I think these times, like I talked about with Jeremy, I had to provoke some anger out of him.
Yeah.
I had to provoke, and it absolutely helped him. He was going to lose that fight. Yeah. And it's the same thing with Carlos. Carlos was absolutely going to lose that fight if he didn't do something different. If he didn't, it's like hitting a turbo button. It's like hitting a nitrous oxide, right? Yeah. It's like hitting the nitrous oxide blower. It's only going to it's only going to make you go hard for another, another 2 minutes, or, well, without nitrous oxide, it's not very long at all. But with anger, it can make you go for another, whatever. Maybe it's 2 minutes. And this is something else. Have you ever missed like a heavy single? Like okay, you're lifting, you're deadlifting, or you're doing power cleans or something, and you miss a heavy signal?
No, I never have.
Yeah,
but
you've never missed,
I've heard.
So this is another easy way to prove it. Man, I miss a heavy signal sometimes, and sometimes I just get angry.
Yeah. It's true.
And I just have to bring the anger.
Yeah.
And I start getting fired up, and I start thinking about things that make me angry.
Yeah.
And I get over to that bar and I rip that thing off the floor like I hate it.
Yes. Yeah.
And it absolutely makes me stronger in that moment. So that's probably adrenaline. And that's probably the same thing that pumped into Marcus's or into Jeremy's head. It's probably the same thing that pumped into Carlos's head. But it's crazy because despite getting punched, despite getting beaten, despite having someone, trying to destroy you in front of a large crowd of people, none of that was able to spark the adrenaline as much as some kind of a tap into the emotional portion of your mind to bring out just enough rage to get out there and get that job done once and for all.
Yeah. And that's really the key there, just enough rage, especially when you're talking about something that requires technique. When you say lifting, you're like power clean, for example. And I remember it was in college, and I was going for my 1 rep max. And you fail a couple of times, but for the sake of saving time and stuff, they only give you 3 times. Well, in my case, they were like, you have to get it 3 times. So the first time I'd gotten all of them. I was pretty solid at power cleans at that time. So I was getting all of them. And then I got to that point, and I didn't get it. It was 300. It was 300. I weighed 185 at the time. 298.
Are you looking for props right there?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll give you props to Echo, everybody. Props to Echo. Remember when he was talking earlier about when you name dropped and stuff? There you have it. That's what it sounds like.
I did that on purpose. I did that on purpose because if I were to go out of my way to leave out that number.
True.
You wanted to know. You wanted to know how much I was doing.
I knew you were going to say it. It didn't matter if I wanted it or
you
not.
wanted to know, bro. Anyway, doesn't matter. Nonetheless, the first time I failed, and everyone's like, "No, you got this. And I had this guy named Ron Wood, was his name. Real blonde hair. Like he's this tough guy, could hit real hard. And he would always get nuts, and he'd be like, "You got this. You didn't. You're this and that. Making me mad or whatever." And I didn't outwardly express any kind of anger, but I felt that anger. And power clean takes technique. That's the thing. It's not like it's just like I don't know, like even bench has some technique. But
deadlift is. I mean, everything has technique, but power clean takes a little bit more technique than other lifts, yes.
Yeah. So it was just the perfect amount of rage. And that's going to depend on what kind of person you are. Like Jeremy Stevens, you could tell just even the way he trains, he uses some rage in there. As opposed to Rory MacDonald, for example, seemingly, I don't know, I don't watch him train all the time or nothing, but it seems like he's super methodical. And rage or anger or whatever isn't as much of a part as someone like Jeremy Stevens.
His fight with
Robbie Lawler.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Crazy.
Brawl.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, man. Yeah, Rory's nuts, man. He's the way they train up there at TriStar. I spent like the weekend, or it was like half a week or whatever, with them, with Faraz and Rory. And Faraz has this head. You know how guys will hold mitts? I'm sure they hold mitts and stuff, but he has this head that you hit the head instead of the mitts. I was like, well, it seems like, oh, that's not that, like, it seems kind of obvious. So I never seen no one do that. And it made way more sense because I've hit mitts before. And then when you go to spar, it's like, it's kind of weird. You got to get used to the difference between hitting mitts and hitting someone's head. So I thought, man, that's fucking clever, man. These guys are smart up here in Canada.
Yeah, respect to those guys. I mean, I respect all the guys that get in the UFC and fight, man. It's awesome to watch. And that Lawler MacDonald fight was just insane.
Yeah.
It was insane.
Yeah.
You should watch that fight if you haven't. Anyone that hasn't watched that fight, go watch that fight. If you want to see a couple of warriors just bringing it all and leaving it all right there in the cage, go watch that fight. So, did you get the power clean?
I got the power clean, yes.
Yes.
And then here's the thing about that power clean is, so I got it, right? And so you go up. And you're like, all right, you got it. You go up in weight. The next one was like 303, like super small weights, you know, because you want to get it.
On.
Yeah, just so you can get the 303. Not even close.
No.
Everything was spent on that.
We missed that one, didn't we?
Yeah, big time.
Was that the all-time life?
No, but I just disengaged. That's all that was. I just disengaged.
Understood. I see where it's at.